Well, good afternoon, colleagues. Welcome to Oregon ORTIi's information session. We know you're all busy, so whether you're here with us live or you're watching this recording down the road, we appreciate your willingness to learn more about us and help us learn about you and how we can best support you as we move forward. So my name is Ryan Blasquez. I'm the Director of Instructional Services at Northwest Regional ESD and with the Oregon ORTIi project. And prior to being in this role, I was a teacher, a central office administrator, an elementary principal in the Tigard-Tualatin district. I see a few TTSD people in the house. Hello. We previously in Tigard housed the project for 17 years. And so Oregon ORTIi's model of building tiered systems of support for literacy allowed our district to scale up that work to where we were thinking about MTSS for attendance, behavior supports, and other academic areas, but we started with reading, and that's the Oregon ORTIi model. We know the work you do in education is complicated, it's hard, and it's about the most important thing. And we believe that having a plan, having a team, using evidence-based practices, those are the most efficient, effective ways to do the incredibly important things you all do. So before I move on, I'm hoping I can get you all to respond. Looks like folks are still trickling in here in the from the waiting room. Welcome, everybody. But I'm hoping you can let us know in the chat, fist of five, how much do you know about the project, who we are and what we do? We ask because we want to hear where you're all at. We're in the process of finalizing our program model for the next cadre or group of districts. Seeing that there's a lot of 4s and 5s here is good. There may not be as many technical questions for us, but there might. But again, we're presenting to y'all live, and we're going to use this recording to share out with the broader audience as well. So our objectives this afternoon are telling you about the project, a little background, a little where we're at now, describe the levels of support we plan to provide, which are currently in draft form, to be honest. We're going to answer your questions. There'll be a fair amount of time for Q&A, and we'll share some of the statewide stuff available to all Oregon educators, and then kind of dial in a little more specifically to being involved in the project in a little more formal way. And then we'll tell you what we know about the application process, but it's kind of early in ODE's budget season, so we don't have specific timelines, but we'll give you a little bit of background of how it's worked in the past. So as I mentioned, I'm Ryan, and I'm joined here by our 3 outstanding coaches. If our coaches could all wave on there they are. We have Beth Ferguson, Lisa Bates, and Nicole Kay. And please note, we are expanding our team this spring, and we are very excited about that. However, these folks are very smart and technically savvy around all things RTI, and they could serve the whole state on their own if we needed to. So to start the information sharing piece of this, I want us to lead with our project purpose. So I'll give you just a moment to read this. So in short, we are a technical assistance team for systematic literacy instruction and intervention. And our work is driven by 50+ years of scientific research about how kids learn to read, and by the belief that being able to read is a civil right. Here are our working mission and vision statements. Like I noted, we are workshopping some things about the project with ODE right now as we get ready to turn in our application and receive your applications. I'll give you just a minute to review these working definitions. What we hope you see in these commitments are: 1, we do our work through an equity lens, and 2, MTSS works for a lot of problems of practice in education, and our project uses elementary reading as the focal content of our technical assistance to all you. So with that short primer, reflect a little bit about what you're hoping to gain today. A lot of 4s and 5s. Maybe you're not, maybe you need to, you know all you need to know at this point, but take about 2 minutes to reflect and add in our chat here what you're hoping to gain.
Just a couple more seconds. So one question, Keely, we are not really focused on math any longer. We did like some 2 cohorts of math, but that is not going to be our focus. Of really focusing on reading. Great, yes. We do recognize that some people, some districts have been in the project a long time ago and may need to come back. Great. Okay, well, I'll get started as you still feel free to be putting in the chat, because we, as Ryan said, we'll be looking at that so we can focus our attention to those questions as well. But just just the evolution of Oregon response to instruction and intervention started in 2005, as Ryan mentioned, in Tigard-Tualatin. And we actually, back then, it didn't even have any dedicated staff members just to the project. It was just staff within Tigard-Tualatin who supported districts as the need arose. And then we've kind of expanded away across the years, changing our frameworks at different times. For some of you who have been in the project before, you might recall our Oregon ORTIi house. That's when we kind of shifted to focus more on some implementation pieces, such as culture and professional learning and leadership. We also changed our name in 2015 because we wanted to focus on the instruction part as well, not just the intervention part. So we became Oregon Response to Instruction and Intervention. And then with COVID, we started doing some virtual professional learning opportunities, which we've carried through now too. For example, like we're doing right now, just feel like we can serve more people and more people can access the supports that way. So it was a good thing to come out of COVID. And then this fall, we moved to the Northwest Regional ESD. And next year, we're excited to be taking on our new Cadre 12 districts and providing some other different levels of support. So this is just a map of all the districts we've served. We served about slightly over 50% of the districts in Oregon. And, we have had a district as small as 2 people, 2 kids. And then we've had our largest district would be Salem-Keizer. So covered quite a bit of the state. But if you've been in district in the past, that's where we've, as you can see from our timeline, we've changed a lot. So that's why we would we're excited to be able to provide some new service delivery models for those districts as well. So why do we need MTSS in reading? We all kind of know the data that are out there. I know from the recent NAEP data that only 33% of 4th graders are at or above proficient in reading. And that was lower than compared to 2019. In Oregon, we saw results come out in the fall that our students being proficient had plummeted for reading, writing, and math. And then also the special education, we want to avoid that tidal wave of unnecessary special education referrals, because we know the impact that COVID had on students' learning. And we want to just make sure that we're not using special ed as the sole solution to support students, because they might not actually have a disability. It might be just because of the lack of instruction that they've received during this disrupted learning or from the trauma that they've had. So we want to be able to change that trajectory so we don't keep falling, going the wrong direction. We want our data to start going up. So just to review some data that we've had from the project, I believe these data are from our Cadre 10 districts. So out of those districts, 79% of them increased the percentage of students who are at low risk or benchmark. And then we had 82% of our districts, Cadre 10, were able to decrease the percentage of students who are at risk or well below benchmark. And then we've also been able to decrease the students being identified with a specific learning disability, both for the overall population and for Latino Hispanic students as well. So basically, we're trying to get the right kids into receiving those services. So how do we, so as I said too, we've kind of evolved our supports through the years. And one of the things we kind of rely on is the implementation stages of how you implement an initiative. So there's the exploration stage where you might be thinking about doing an effective practice or an effective initiative, and you're just trying to sort that out. And what we really do then is to provide support starting from the installation stage, where I noticed one of you said that you were starting to build your system. We really support you through that installation stage. So this way you can have effective implementation. So we really help you. We have some rubrics and different assessment sources to just really help you to understand what is needed for you to install those practices. And we support you through that when you begin to initiate implementation, and then hopefully get you to full implementation as well, where things are just kind of running smoothly. But as some of you pointed out, you have new staff and different things come up. So, so sometimes you might fall back into an earlier stage, and that's okay. But we hope we're going to give you the tools then to know how to handle that, and then to make adjustments as needed. So it's really always that ongoing cycle of improvement. And then, so we kind of take those stages, and then there's what the National Implementation Research Network really kind of shows what factors are needed to get to successful outcomes. And first, you need to start with an effective practice. So with Oregon ORTIi, we're talking about those multi-tiered systems of support in reading based in the science of reading, so those effective reading practices. Then the how is really looking at how are you providing professional learning for your staff? How are you building their competency to have the knowledge and skills to implement those effective practices that we want to see, and putting in infrastructure to support it as well. And then times that by having enabling context. So looking at your barriers to implementation. So maybe you have some policies or procedures that are getting in the way of implementation. How you're allocating resources. Is it just everyone gets the same thing, or are they kind of allocated based on need? And then just what are the culture and the environment of your community and school to support that? And Beth will talk about each of these ones a little bit more in depth actually right now. But actually, sorry. So do notice it is a multiplication table. So if you don't have one of these in place, anything times 0 is going to be 0. So it's so we really do help you support you through these different elements or factors. Okay.
Yes, and now I will talk a little bit more about those effective practices. And it really is about how are we scaling the evidence-based practices based in what a lot of people are now calling the science of reading. And how are we making sure that kids are getting that across all levels of support? I really like what the Reading League has to say about this in kind of their preamble to the definition of the science of reading, that they are committed to evidence-aligned reading instruction. So all of the components within Scarborough's reading rope, if you are not familiar with the Scarborough's reading rope, you will be, but all of those that kids are getting evidence-aligned instruction in all of those areas, and that kind of that balance of that sense of urgency that I feel all the time, every day. My team kind of is like tired of my sense of urgency on this, but then also being able to do that in a comprehensive and systematic way, so that we're ensuring that those really great practices are in place for all students in all classrooms across all tiers in the whole system that we are responsible for. So it's just a little bit of work, right? Just a little bit. So I want to do a quick review of what we're talking about when we talk about the MTSS framework. And I know a lot of you have heard this before, and I'm not going to get into all of the parts really in depth, just because this is an overview. But MTSS is that district-wide system for providing instructional, behavioral, or social emotional supports for our students. And there's really important features in that. And first and foremost, your system has to be structured in an equitable system where we're looking at that inclusive and equitable culture. And there's a lot to that I'm not going to get into today, but we just want to reiterate that this is all grounded in equity. And then the MTSS that is then developed and sustained through that district-wide infrastructure and capacity building. Like Lisa was mentioning before, how are we identifying and removing barriers so that teachers and other staff can be implementing those evidence-based practices? And all of this done within that two-way communication with families and communities, so that we're building with and not for. And all of this support system is there to enable schools to be able to provide those evidence-based instruction and supports across all levels that are needed, being able to use data to provide teachers opportunities to really look at the data and have collaborative database support planning for the students that they are caring for. And all of this is really important piece of this is that it's all intended to help our students reach grade level or beyond for whatever it is that we are implementing. And that's an important piece. It's not about sorting kids into piles and leaving there. It's about how are we supporting them to get to that grade level expectation or beyond. So what does this mean for reading in particular and the work that's done within the project? A good robust MTSS can ensure that most students are taught to read properly the first time, and it is designed to provide safety nets to catch those students who aren't learning right away, and how are we providing what they need when they need it. So the work that your team would do with the project is building standards of practice around all of the things that you see in this framework, whether that is core instruction, looking at those evidence-based practices that we are using, looking at our screening data to ask the question of who is our instruction working for, who is it not working for, which students might need an additional layer of support, and talking about that at core review. That second layer of support for some students that's layered on top of tier 1, those standardized interventions, continuing to monitor progress to ensure that they are on track to meet that grade level expectation, and adjusting instruction at intervention review meetings. And then also understanding that some students may need yet another layer of support. And so how are we customizing and individualizing that for them? And so all of that is kind of the work that we're doing in order to give the students in your care the right instruction at the right time so that they can become readers. So thinking about that, that was our effective practice, the evidence-based reading instruction in an MTSS. So how do we make sure this happens? What's the how here? And that is the training piece. And so you've probably read a lot in the news in the last month or so. Actually, I think this only goes back 6 weeks. Oregon teachers need more training. Yep, we know that. We need more training in the science of reading and practices that are more effective. We also need core programs and intervention programs that are rooted in the science, and be implementing those in our schools. One thing we are not seeing a lot of yet is a discussion about coaching and support. So understanding that as whatever it is we're implementing, yes, we are training people on the pieces. Yes, we're providing the materials that they need to implement these improved practices. And we are going to provide coaching and feedback. And that's some of the work that we do with you, is how are we setting up structures so that we can provide that coaching and feedback to make sure that we are implementing the thing we said we were going to implement. And then those enabling contexts, like Lisa talked about, really it is how are we supporting the staff to do the work? And it's building that culture of teaming, that collaborative teaming process, whether it's grade level teams, building level teams, district level teams, and how are those teams communicating with each other so that we're identifying those barriers, identifying ways to get minimize the barriers, identifying resources. So how are we doing all of that in order to enable this work to be done? So in like 30 seconds or less, or it's a little bit more than that, that's kind of all the work that the project does. It's really 4 years, and I did it in less than 4 minutes. So here we go. But I do want to, before we move on to what the service delivery will look like next year, I want to address some things that you may have heard about ORTIi, MTSS, and things that you may hear as you're embarking on this work, or even while you're in the middle of this work. And so also be thinking about other things that you have heard that you might want to ask us about. So MTSF, ORTIi, the name of this project is Oregon ORTIi. It sounds like we're having a bit of an identity crisis, trying to determine who are we, right? And so the answer is yes, we are all of these things. Go back to what Ryan said, the purpose of the project was, it really is, our role is to support districts on improving their instruction across all tiers. And we are also charged with supporting districts in the use of RTI for SLD identification. So in order to be able to identify the right students for the right supports at the right time, you can tell I'm going to say this multiple times, we have to be sure that all of our other tiers of support are solid. So that's why we kind of are both and talking about RTI, response to instruction, response to intervention, and what is the adult response to student data. So can be a little bit confusing, and some language sparks different conversations in different settings. So it's just going to be really clear, be important to be super clear about what is meant by RTI, what is meant by MTSS. And then really thinking about, a lot of times people come to the project and they think, okay, RTI is about interventions. Let's just buy the right interventions and all our problems will be solved. So again, because we know that all the tiers need to be really strong, that buying the right intervention is not going to solve all of your issues. It's really about all of the systems that are in place. And then another thing is that we really encourage districts to change how they're talking about tiers. You may have heard people saying things like, my tier 1 students, that kid is totally a tier 3 student. That's a tier 2 intervention. That's a tier 3 intervention. All of that. And we try to encourage people to talk about those tiers, really reiterating that it's about the tiers of support that we as the adults are providing to be responsive to student need. So changing what we say to maybe saying instead, students who need an additional layer of support is better than saying that's a tier 2 student. We really want to focus on what we are doing as the adults. And the next two are very related, and I think these are very common misunderstandings and misconceptions about RTI. You have probably heard people say that RTI is about those hoops I have to jump through in order to get this kid into SPED so someone else can make them better, right? And that is not at all what RTI is. It is also not about preventing special education referral. It is about giving kids the right support at the right time. And sometimes that does mean special education. And special education is a part of the MTSS. So we're going to continue to look at student outcomes and expect growth in special education. And so it's part of that whole system of reflecting on who are all of our tiers of support working for and who are they not working for. Here's another strange misconception that we have heard. So we have a disproportionality problem. So we're just not going to provide interventions to certain groups of students in order to solve the problem. Well, that doesn't solve the problem. And there's some really ethical issues and some child find issues with a statement like that. So we are not going to deny the students the support they need in order to become a reader. So yes, you do need to notice over time that perhaps your core instruction is not working equitably or effectively for some groups of students, and you need to address that. But MTSS gives you the structure to be able to ask really important questions, such as, who is our core instruction effective for? For which students or student groups is our core instruction not effective for? How do we know? What do we need to do differently to get more equitable outcomes? Same is true for our reading intervention. Same is true for special education. We're going to constantly be asking those questions within our MTSS. And this leads to another thing you might hear sometimes, that RTI is an inequitable practice. MTSS is a system, so therefore it's inherently inequitable. And we would argue that what MTSS does is it reveals your inequity, your disproportionality. It reveals inequities within your system. And what the point of MTSS is again, provide the right students with the right level of support at the right time, which pretty much is the definition of equity, giving kids what they need when they need it. So that's another one that we really try to address, because yes, if RTI, if you look at it as a way to sort kids into piles and leave them there, that is truly an unequitable process. But if it's about determining what students need and giving them what they need in order to get them to grade level, that is what equity is. One more thing is, you might be thinking that my district is too big, too small, too rural, too urban. We've already been in the project before, whatever. This might not be the right fit for us. Just know that, like Lisa said, we worked with the very smallest district in the state. We are currently working with the second largest. All of this is to say, though, that the job of the district team, with support from your coach, is to really contextualize all of this information for your setting. It's about being culturally and community responsive to the students in your care, to the families in your setting. And so it's not a one size fits all. We're not asking you to have every system look exactly the same, depending on your size, depending on your community. That's the work that the district implementation team really has to dig into. How do we take these evidence-based practices and what we know works best and make sure it's happening with our staff and for our kids? And that's kind of the work that you're going to do when you are in this project. That was a lot of things about kind of what we do, what are some misconceptions about RTI. So as we transition to the next presenter, and probably the point you've all been waiting for, what are the service delivery models? I want you to think for a second, what was it that either Lisa or I said that was affirming to your understanding of MTSS or about the Oregon RTI project? What are some concerns that you've heard that you're worried about in your context? And we will, as you're writing those things in the chat, we will transition. Okay, so before Nicole takes over, I just want to share this quote that we have been using a lot in the last couple of months. And that is, in short, if we want to make the education system better, we could try to concoct the perfect intervention, the new curriculum, a new model, right? It's that shiny object syndrome that we all have, that we're all a little bit guilty of, and we're going to hope for the best. Or we could settle for a pretty good solution, such as evidence-based practices based in the science of reading, that's equipped with so many built-in feedback loops that it can't help but get better over time. And that's what MTSS does, is it gives you those feedback loops so that you are able to say, this thing we are doing is working. For whom is it working? For whom is it not working yet? And what do we need to do differently? So that's kind of the bottom line about MTSS. All right, go ahead, Nicole.
Thank you so much, Beth. You always put things so eloquently. I love it. So now for some maybe juicy morsels, our delivery models. And so in anticipation of next year, we actually have, we are anticipating 3 different levels of service, if you will. And so I'm just going to briefly talk through some of those opportunities. So one level of service we're calling statewide supports, and this is available to any district across the state, and we even participants from across the country. So what we provide is our annual conference that will be in person in Eugene next year. You can also attend our virtual reading symposium. We also offer foundations training, and that would also be virtual. And you may have the opportunity for 1 or 2 virtual coaching sessions per year, dependent on availability, and access to other Oregon RTII virtual or recorded events. So a lot of goodies for you with that option. And also our website and things like that have a treasure trove of resources. The expectation, this is the easy expectations right here. So expectations for districts, there's none with this level of support. It's come as you want and get what you would like out of it. So there's no deliverables. So this next level of service is something that we have not in the past provided. So this is a little new for us, but we're calling it targeted technical assistance. So this is something that may be provided to some districts, and it's really on a year-to-year basis. With this delivery model, you would have all of the goodies that come with the statewide level of service or support. And in addition, you would be a part of our project and have a dedicated Oregon ORTIi coach. And we're thinking about 2 or up to 4 visits per year. You can attend all of the statewide trainings, as I mentioned. And in addition, this level of support would receive or go to the trainings in one specific content area of our cadre specific training. So these are trainings that we form just for our current cohort. And this is determined by a needs assessment. And there may be some financial assistance that is a little bit unclear at this time, so won't promise too much. And expectations for a targeted technical assistance is there is an application process, so you would need to apply. All of those things would, requirements that I'll talk about in a moment will be pertinent to that. You would also need to attend required trainings. These can be in person and or virtual, and completing some assessments. So we will want to take a look at your reading outcomes and also help you go through our Oregon ORTIi implementation rubrics. And the third level of service, we're calling comprehensive technical assistance, AKA Cadre 12, our 12th cohort, which we're very excited about. And this is a full sequence that is a 4-year in length, the full scope and sequence of that model and framework that Beth talked through. So this is what we have typically had as our cohort. So a dedicated Oregon ORTIi coach, and with a minimum of 4 visits per year, especially in the year 1, that is typically superseded. We go over that, but it is based on your needs and the content at the time. You also receive everything and above, so all the statewide trainings, the full and the full sequence of the cadre specific trainings. So expectations for Cadre 12, the same expectations I went over in for targeted, and there's going to be some additional implementation items. So for example, since that cadre is receiving a full meal deal of scope and sequence, you would also be doing our assessments that cover all of that scope and sequence. And things like a handbook and leadership teaming documents, things like that. So there will be a few additional expectations for those districts. Also, Cadre 12, I think I forgot to mention, will receive some funding. Typically, it's not the most exciting amount that you could ever receive, but it does cover some of the cost. And again, that is to be determined, the exact amounts. So before, I'm not going to have a pause here, but I do want to just remind you that, especially given this new delivery model, what questions do you have? Please pop them in the chat and continue to do so. I'm going to continue talking through a little bit more, but this might have some questions. So I just wanted to make sure that you pop those in the chat. Oh, and actually really quick, so the targeted technical assistance might be, or would likely be a district who has been a part of our project before in the past and now needs maybe a targeted selection of content. So the application process, again, it's still being determined and worked out, all the details, but what we can tell you, the timeline, we are hoping to get some concrete information, I think by March, maybe. We're not quite sure. There's a process that we must go through with ODE. We collaborate with them and go through the procurement process. So sometimes that takes a little longer than we want. But the good news is, if you are here today, we will let you know as soon as that application is open, or we are able to start taking some information from you all. So we will send an email to those who attended today. It will be posted on the ODE website, our website, and hopefully you also get our newsletter, a monthly newsletter, and it will be featured in there as well. So in the meantime, if you're really excited, and we hope you are, one of your first next steps is creating that team or getting that team together. So a district implementation leadership team oversees the development and use of a district implementation infrastructure to support students in their use of MTSS. So you want to make sure that this work is done with a team. So some members include district level administrators and staff, selected building principals and staff, and it's really important. We find that this work just will not bear wings if your leadership is confined to really just a couple of people. This is really about shared leadership. Also very important is asking that question, whose voices are essential to building an equitable MTSS? We do not want to be inequitable, and so it's critical to have experts and voices of people on your team who are experts on implementing reading, or if you're doing other things for your MTSS like SEL, you need experts on implementation science and experts on the community and the context in which you live. And you can kind of think of your district implementation leadership team as the backbone of this implementation work. We just wanted to highlight, this is a great, fabulous book if you want to take a look at that in the interim. It is by Hamilton, Reeves, and Clinton and Hattie, called Building to Impact, the 5D Implementation Playbook for Educators. And we have really drawn some great ideas from this newly authored book. And so really the sole purpose is to really drive the search, as they say, for appropriate, meaty, and challenging goals, designing initiatives to achieve those goals, and go through the process of implementing, evaluating, iteration, sustain, scale, or stop. So really all of those different implementation moves. And a little bit of nuts and bolts about our application before we move on to some question and answer. Some general requirements. Again, this is what we have had in the past, so it may look a little bit different this upcoming. Remains to be seen. But you must be an Oregon public school district. You must use a research-based universal screener, and that is something that is approved on the approved list for dyslexia screening. But in our project and in MTSS, we actually use that screener K5. And also you will need an ODE approved research-based core reading program. And the last piece is completing the application with that team. So as I described, it's really important to have that team gathering. And these are the same people that are going to be leading the work. And so it behooves you to gather up for the application process so that all the folks that you need to have on your team are part of the process from the get-go. Usually we have some questions about your context, maybe asking a little bit about your current reading outcome data, a little bit about why you're interested in the project, and we will likely have an assessment for you to complete to get a little snapshot of where your system is currently. And I think that's about it. So that was a lot of information for you all. I hope you stayed with us. And now we're going to open up the floor via chat. an opportunity for Q&A. And so, yeah.
You're welcome. We're a small group, so you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask a question as well.
It looked like we were all kind of responding on top of each other on some of the prompts, but early on there was a question just about the revitalizing or rebooting of RTI systems and participating in the project previously. And that's really, you know, thinking about the current context in Oregon, the amount of movement, the amount of new leaders and new teachers, and how to best support our state. That's that targeted assistance piece. And I think in the slide, it said that was a 1-year support model, but really our thinking has been, you know, it starts with at least a year. And, you know, if you're continuing that work and it makes sense based on needs assessments and where you're at in your journey, that we could, you know, there could be a re-up essentially for another year to continue to be part of that technical support.
And it should come to nobody's surprise as an MTSS entity that we have some rubrics and some data to help you make a database decision about what your targeted area needs to be at this time. And we have one rubric that kind of acts like a little bit of a screener. And then we have ones that act a little more diagnostically. So we can always do that with you and kind of determine where you are and what level of support that you would need, and whether it might be better to come reboot the whole, you know, not even reboot, but re-implement the whole thing versus what are some really high impact things we could do to get the system going well at this point. So,
and then there's a question about the trainings, the cadre specific trainings. I responded in the chat. Did you want more information about that, or was what I said good?
So I also want to address the middle school question. And that kind of is, short answer is no, we're not going to have a middle school cadre. That said, some of the targeted things, especially around reading interventions, you might be able, given the support that we provide, you might be able to adapt to your middle school system, because we do know that there's a lot of questions about that. And that's good information.
Yeah, just a little background there. And I think Lori asked that question. And, you know, we've tried to audit kind of what we've been doing. This project's existed now for 18 years. This is the 18th year. And over time, of course, given what's happening in our communities, you know, what's happening with legislation, we try to respond and adapt and adjust what we're doing. And quite honestly, when we step back, I think we were trying to do maybe too many things for too many people. And we're currently in a time where there's a refocusing on the need for early literacy, you know, professional development for teachers, systems, multi-tiered systems of support, database decision-making around literacy. And we're kind of having a national reckoning, as Beth showed with a couple of the quotes and clips from Oregon, the Oregonian. And so, you know, we're trying to recalibrate and get back to that foundational work of what Oregon RTI could be before we overcommit. And Lori, with the MTSS supports being in the region, I'm not sure if you've had a chance to meet Lindsay Pratt. She's on this meet as well. So I'm happy to introduce the two of you. She works at Northwest Regional as part of our MTSS team and can do some supports for your local teams at the middle school level for sure. Just to comment, I think on, maybe this was another question about the middle school, but those universal statewide supports are accessible to all levels and all folks. So being part of those kind of tiered trainings and best practices for developing a schedule and family partnerships and all that work we'll do is going to be accessible for everybody.
And I know there's at least one district on this call that has taken kind of what they've been learning around elementary and, you know, having conversations themselves around what it looks like to ramp it up to middle school. So
we've had districts do that in the past too, where it's focused on elementary, but the middle school folks have maybe sat in on some of the meetings that we've had or possibly attended trainings and things like that.
I just put these slides in the chat, and those have our email addresses on them. I think it was on slide 3 or something. So if you have follow-up questions for us.
There was another question about the types of the cadre specific trainings.
Yes,
And
so that
that.
I answered it and I asked if that was
Oh, gotcha.
and
okay.
she said yes. So I
Okay,
think we're good with that. Unless someone else has a question about it.
Yeah, it's every single piece of that framework, but expanded out.
Can I ask a question in person? Is that okay?
Yes.
So the question I have is, when you are trying to decide, like if we decided to go with the targeted level, I'm assuming that you would be looking at our school-wide data as a starter. And then I'm wondering, would you be coming out and observing how our program currently looks as well? Or how do you guys determine what our cadre specific is? Is it going to be like more what we ask you we need? Or is it going to be like a combination of different ways of gathering what you feel we need versus in conjunction with what we think we need? Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So we haven't totally figured all the details out with it, but yes, I think it'd be more that combination. What we've sometimes found is that that some districts think they have thing that's more in place, but then they kind of go through our training and they're like, oh, we need to really make some enhancements to that. So I think it'd be more in conjunction together.
Okay.
But I think we'll be flexible with it, and we're just open to the conversations about it and what best would fit your district's needs and what's doable, what you have the capacity for, and things like that too.
Okay.
Yeah, so we have, as we mentioned, a lot of resources. And so we've given you a few hyperlinks that you can access via the slides, but we have our website, the link to our annual conference, and there's information about that. This, I'll say a little tiny piece about that in just a moment. We also have a module series, or a couple different module series. One that's really an overview and a little bit, like a little teaser of the various components of MTSSR, so for reading. And then we also have a professional development series for science of reading that could be really useful for your PD. And that's a little bit like a DIY PD. So there's slides and then your team would gather together and discuss. So those are some things that we thought you might value. And then, yeah, would be really excited if you joined us for our in-person annual conference this year. You're co-hosting with Northwest PBIS. So that's pretty exciting for us. And so we just have some information for you about that there. I don't know, Ryan, would you like to say anything more about that?
No, I think that's good. I think we're kind of getting close to time, and so I think if I just want to encourage folks to reach out if some of these questions that were asked, like what dictates whether this is a targeted support, a comprehensive support, that we're kind of, that's fluid right now. I mean, we want to support as many districts as we can. We want to equitably resource for teams who need more or different. And so I think a lot of those decisions about kind of what services and ORTIi teaming makes sense might come through. Some of that needs assessment work, but also maybe with some conversation with us. So if you're able to connect with us to ask specific questions, I'd really encourage you to do that.
So there is a question about the conference, and yes, there will be reading specific topics at the conference. It is we have built out the reading strands of the PBIS conference. yes, a lot of it is what you will have seen at Northwest PBIS conference in the past, but more focus on reading. And it won't be quite the size of our the one we used to have in Eugene, or where it was only us doing it, but given our capacity this year, this was the best opportunity we had to have an in-person conference. And so we are excited about the reading things that are going to be presented, but we've also made a real effort in a lot of the presentations to make sure we're tying the academic side with the social emotional side and the behavioral side. So it really is about MTSS and those structures that are in place across all of those areas. So I'm really trying to make it clear for people that MTSS is kind of the plate on which all of this work can rest, regardless of the area that you are implementing, and leveraging kind of those structures that you've built in, whether you're doing the academic side or social emotional learning, et cetera. So hopefully it will be yes and for all those things. And of course, we have Anita Archer coming, so that's good.
And she's doing one of the workshops.
Yeah.
And we do have the reading symposium, the virtual ones that we did last year and this year. So those are all just focused on reading. And then as Beth said, next year when we're in Eugene, that'll just be, we won't be partnering with PBIS, Northwest PBIS. We'll still have some behavioral sessions there, but it'll be more like the traditional conferences we've had in the past.
Again, we'll just thank you so much for being here. We'll distribute not only the video, but the slide deck, and we'll post these all on the website as well. So again, really encourage you to reach out for more district or team specific questions. We're happy to talk about any and all of that. So thank you so much.